Howdy friends, I'm Joel Empey, and welcome to another episode of Joel Empey Talks Mixed Martial Arts. And on today's episode, we're going to preview UFC Mexico City. We're going to just talk about the co-main event and the main event in that one. We're going to look back at UFC Vancouver and talk about what's next for some of the key players from that event. But first, I want to talk about Justin Gaethje specifically. Now, Gaethje, the story on him, and I was talking about Justin Gaethje in this facet last week, is that he's the most violent man in mixed martial arts, and he's got a reckless style that he just crashes forward and crowds his opponents with no regard for his own health or safety, and is willing to take an immense amount of damage in order to deliver his own damage. And that's not the story about Justin Gaethje anymore. We have to abandon that old storyline. That's an old storyline by this point in his career, because you have to face the facts that in his three most recent fights, they've all been victories for Justin Gaethje by first round knockout. And in all three of those fights, Justin Gaethje took almost no damage, and those were all against extremely high level opponents, all of them strikers as well. So, when you're taking on fighters like James Vick, Edson Barboza, Cowboy Cerrone, and you're engaging with them in pure stand-up contests, and you're taking no damage yourself, the story it can no longer be that Justin Gaethje is the most violent man in MMA. Now we have to talk about Justin Gaethje as a cerebral fighter, an intelligent fighter with an extraordinary skill set, an extraordinary will to win, and the fact is also Gaethje has this immense wrestling game that he's just been keeping in his back pocket his whole career. He's never even had to pull it out. But if you watch, he expertly controls the distance. He expertly controls the scenarios in which striking takes place. He stood perfectly outside of Cowboy's kicking range, and then perfectly inside whenever he wanted to conduct his own offense. Gaethje can switch stances. He fights on his own terms now. He doesn't just crowd his opponents with no regard. He actually picks his spots and intelligently decides when to throw and when to get out of the way. He angles off expertly. Cowboy Cerrone is one of the best strikers in the entire sport of mixed martial arts. And Gaethje went into that fight and took just about zero damage. Edson Barboza, maybe the best Muay Thai striker, pure Muay Thai striker in the sport of mixed martial arts. Gaethje went in there and put the wood to him and KO'd him viciously in the first round. And we saw Edson Barboza most recently against Paul Felder in Abu Dhabi, and Edson Barboza looked like old Edson Barboza. He didn't look shop worn. So, you have to give Gaethje full credit for that win. At the time, you weren't sure is Edson Barboza, did he just fall off a cliff? Did he get over the hill all of a sudden? Or is Gaethje actually that good? Gaethje is actually that good. And he is no longer the most violent man in mixed martial arts. He is now a legitimate title contender. And with his aggression and his angles that he can cut, his dirty boxing, he has one punch knockout power. That's very evident now. He dropped Cerrone viciously. And then looked at the ref to stop the fight, hit him a couple more times, looked at the ref again, hit him one more time, and then the ref mercifully stopped it. But Gaethje knows he has that one punch knockout power. When he hit Cerrone with that right hook over the top, he knew Cerrone was done. Think about he made James Vick face plant. He made Edson Barboza face plant. He's got legitimate one punch knockout power. And like I said, for him taking on the winner of like a Tony and Khabib type of fight, Gaethje has that wrestling pedigree in his back pocket. So nobody has really put him in the wrestling or forced him to show his wrestling in MMA so far. So it would be very interesting to see how his style would match up against the winner of Tony and Khabib. Tony is just such a violent and aggressive fighter himself. I mean, him and Gaethje would be insanity. And if, Khabib is able to beat Tony and Gaethje were to fight Khabib, how would Gaethje's wrestling, he's a former Div 1 wrestler, how would his wrestling hold up against Khabib? So if you look at Khabib's past opponents, he's really never fought anybody with a legitimate grappling pedigree so far in his mixed martial arts career. It's really interesting. A lot of the high-level fighters at 155 are primarily strikers. Obviously, Tony has a wrestling background, so that matchup versus Tony and Khabib is going to be really telling. But I really would like to see Gaethje versus the winner of one of those two fighters. Now, in terms of what's next for Justin Gaethje, there's only one fight that makes sense, and that is the money fight against Conor McGregor. And it makes sense for both guys, really. Conor needs another high-level win if he wants to be able to have a legitimate claim at a rematch with Khabib. And Justin Gaethje right now is on a 3-fight, first-round KO streak. And Gaethje is likely to oblige Conor in the type of fight that Conor wants, a striking contest. Conor doesn't want to fight a grappler. He wants to fight somebody that's going to stand with him, that he can showcase his skills, and it gives him the best chance at victory. Meanwhile, Gaethje is kind of stuck right now because Tony is the clear-cut next contender for Khabib, and there's nobody else above Gaethje other than Tony, Khabib, and Conor. Now, Conor represents a chance for Gaethje to make an immense amount of money, get a win over the most famous guy in the entire sport, and then he would be undeniably the next contender for the winner of Tony and Khabib. So this fight just makes sense from both of their perspectives, and then it makes a ton of sense for the fans' perspective. Because, who wouldn't want to see Justin Gaethje versus Conor McGregor? That would be a guaranteed firework fest, and the winner would have a legitimate claim as the next title contender. And this storyline that Gaethje is, the Homer Simpson of MMA, that has to be left in the dust now. Gaethje's clearly a cerebral fighter who understands range, and a matchup with him and Conor would be just a phenomenal one that the fans deserve and both the fighters really deserve at this point. I really felt like Gaethje kind of did himself a disservice by not having, a somewhat prepared call out for Conor in the post-fight interview. That in your post-fight interview, that's your opportunity to maximize the message that you want to put out there into the world. For him to act cooler than school, too cool for school, it really kind of did himself a disservice. If he could have gotten on the mic after his third consecutive KO, and this time over one of the biggest names in the sport in Cowboy Cerrone, if he could have gotten on the mic and called out Conor and poked his finger into Conor's chest, so to speak, it would have been undeniable. The UFC would have been pumping that out. Conor is also looking for, a big fight against somebody who wants to be brash and bold and can sell pay-per-views with him. Conor doesn't want to do all of the legwork himself, but he really needs a win over another top contender, which Gaethje Gaethje is, and Conor really just needs to get back to fighting. That's what made him so famous in the first place. All of this Twitter back and forths with people, it's enough of that. Conor just needs to fight again, and Gaethje is the perfect opponent. It's the perfect timing. It makes sense for both guys. The fans will love it. This is just a fight that needs to be made next. This could easily be, an end-of-the-year pay-per-view. It could be an early 2020 pay-per-view, and the winner would have a legitimate claim, like I've already said, as being the next number one contender in the lightweight division. So, what's next for Cerrone, the loser of the main event there? I really feel like Cerrone, it's not that big of a deal that he lost. If Cerrone were to win, then he would be, where Justin Gaethje is right now, in place to claim, a Conor McGregor fight and that would be, a number one contender fight. Cerrone would be on his way up as a title contender. But since he lost that fight, Cerrone's just where he's always been. He's one of the most exciting fighters in the entire sport. He's got a very recognizable name. Anybody who's any kind of an MMA fan knows Cowboy. Like, you don't even have to call him Donald Cerrone. Like, it's just one word, Cowboy. And you know who we're talking about. his name is synonymous with entertainment. His name is synonymous with the UFC. His name is synonymous with big entertaining fights. So he's in the same position that he's always been in. He could go up to 170. He could stay at 55. He could fight, a veteran of the sport. He could fight a newcomer of the sport. He could fight an established high-up contender. They could do Cowboy versus Poirier. That's an interesting fight. If you want to, they're both guys coming off of losses. If you want to give Cowboy another high-ranked contender to try to keep Cowboy in that top 5 type of a range, if he really does have desires on capturing that UFC lightweight title, then the Poirier fight would make a lot of sense. But I personally think that a high-level fighter like Poirier, with Cowboy coming off of 2 consecutive TKO losses, that fight, I wouldn't want to see Cowboy. I would rather see him get his feet wet with, another veteran like Jim Miller. I know they've already fought before, but the fact is that Jim Miller's on a bit of a streak right now. They're tied. Jim and Cowboy are tied for the most fights in UFC history. Both of them have 33 UFC fights. That's insanity. A lot of high-level professional fighters never even reached 33 professional fights, let alone 33 fights in the UFC, competing against the best competitors in the entire sport, in the entire world. Week in or year in and year out, these guys are just fighting the best in the world. And like I said, Miller's on a little bit of a streak right now. He's claimed that he wants to make his run and try to regain, top 15 type of status again. And he feels that he lost a lot of recent years in his career. He lost a big chunk of those years. He was still competing, but he wasn't able to compete at a very high level because he had Lyme disease. Which, I don't think it's very easy to fight with Lyme disease. It notoriously makes you sluggish and, low energy and stuff like that. So, I tend to kind of believe Jim Miller. I don't know if he is still a top 15 caliber fighter, but he's on a little bit of a streak. He has, reason to claim a top 15 opponent, and there's reasonable doubt, with him having Lyme disease, that it's reasonable to think that Jim Miller hasn't been able to compete at his full capacity. So let's have him fight maybe let him fight Cowboy and see if Miller wins, boom, like now he can actually do what he said he wanted to do after his most recent win and, make a run at the title. And if he loses, which I think that Cowboy would be the clear favorite in that one, then you're getting Cowboy back on the horse, so to speak. You're letting him, fight a veteran guy that on paper isn't going to, physically damage him that badly when Cowboy's coming off of 2 consecutive TKO losses. So that fight makes a ton of sense. Another fight that would make a lot of sense for Cowboy would be fighting Diego Ferreira. Ferreira just had a huge win in Abu Dhabi. He's on a big win streak. He's beaten a lot, basically almost all the big names and a lot of the toughest guys that are outside the top 15 at lightweight. Diego Ferreira has already beaten, and he needs somebody in the top 15 to give him a crack, just to give him a chance to make his claim as a legitimate contender in the lightweight division, like he really, really wants to, and frankly deserves to. He looked sensational against Mairbek Taisumov at UFC Abu Dhabi really recently. He's known for his jiu-jitsu, but his striking was on full display against a person who's supposed to have better striking than him. His cardio, Diego's cardio, was insane in that fight. It was over 100 degrees in that arena in Abu Dhabi. Diego had non-stop pressure for 3 full rounds and still had gas left in the tank at the end of it. So Diego Ferreira absolutely deserves a top 15 opponent. Cowboy is one to give these relative unknowns. I know if you're a hardcore MMA fan, you definitely know who Diego Ferreira is, but Cowboy's one to give these slightly unknown guys a chance at making a name off of his back, and Cowboy typically always wins those fights, Leon Edwards excluded. But so that fight would make a lot of sense if Cowboy was wanting to give a newcomer a shot like he's known to do. So there's just a plethora of options for Cowboy. I feel like he didn't lose any stock in that loss. He could fight up 70, he could fight at 55, he could fight a newcomer, he could fight a veteran, he could fight a top contender. He could do anything. Cowboy is still Cowboy. Everybody loves to watch him fight. He can be a co-main event on any card, basically, that the UFC could put on. He could be a main event on basically any card that's not a pay-per-view. So Cowboy, it sucks that he lost. It sucks that he's on a 2-fight losing streak after looking like he was, rejuvenated in his career after the birth of his son. But Cowboy's still gonna Cowboy. He's got tons of options left, and I'm down to see any of them, really. And the last fighter I want to talk about from UFC Vancouver is Uriah Hall. Now, Uriah Hall is another guy who, like Cowboy, there's not a ton of fresh matchups for Uriah. Uriah's really been occupying that top 15 type of space in the middleweight division ever since he got off of The Ultimate Fighter. He's just a highly entertaining action fighter. So the UFC just constantly gives him other fighters that are high level and entertaining as well, because people want to watch it. People want to watch it happen, Uriah Hall is a very exciting fighter. He's on a bit of a streak right now. He's on a 3-fight win streak, I believe. So in the top 15, there's only a couple of guys that are, that are up there that he hasn't faced yet. One of those guys is Brad Tavares. So Brad Tavares and Ian Heinisch are coming up here on October 26th. I think the winner of that fight would make a ton of sense. Both those guys are, all three of those guys are all side by side in the rankings in the UFC right now. And Heinisch and Tavares are, two of the only fresh matchups in the top 15. So taking on the winner of that, you'd be fighting another guy who's on a win streak. I mean, if Heinisch wins, it'll only be a 1-fight win streak, and same with Tavares for that matter. But you want to fight a guy coming off of a win. If you're a guy coming off of a win, you want to fight a guy around you in the rankings so you can make some progress in the division. So that's the fight that makes a ton of sense for Uriah Hall. The only other fight that could possibly make sense for Uriah Hall would be possibly Darren Till, depending on how Till's fight goes with Gastelum. If Till, loses in a close decision, then the Hall fight could make sense, because they're both exciting strikers. If Till were to beat Gastelum, that would also make a lot of sense, because it would be a big grudge match with Hall and Gastelum being very good friends. So those are the three fighters that would really make sense for Uriah Hall. The winner of Heinisch and Tavares, or Darren Till, pending the outcome in his fight against Gastelum. If Till just gets washed, then Till should fight somebody outside the top 15. But if Till is, if it's a really close competitive fight, or if Till were to get the victory, then the fight against Hall would make a ton of sense. All right, now looking forward to UFC Mexico City coming up this weekend, let's break down what the co-main event might look like. Carla Esparza versus Alexa Grasso. It's a very interesting matchup. Alexa Grasso is obviously a Mexican descent, so she's gonna have the crowd on her side in that one. But the interesting thing about this fight is, and the entire card in general, is the altitude. These are 115-pound girls, so the cardio shouldn't be that too much of an issue. It's only a 3-round fight. But let's just talk about how their styles match up against one another, because it's a real contrast of styles in this fight. Carla Esparza is a wrestler. She's got very good top control. She's got a plethora of different takedowns. But the thing about Carla Esparza is that she's 5'1", which is extremely small for the division. She's really an atom weight fighter. She should be fighting at 105, but the UFC doesn't have a 105 pound division, even though 105 would be a way better division than 145 for women's MMA. But I digress. Carla has, like I said, really good wrestling, really good top control, but she's really short, doesn't have good length, and sometimes, she has to really reach for those takedowns. She doesn't necessarily set them up by closing the distance with her striking that well. She doesn't necessarily have the best ability to pressure fighters. And Alexa Grasso, in contrast to Carla's wrestling, has maybe the best boxing in the strawweight division. Just boxing, hand speed, footwork, great jab. She's a really, really good boxer. Probably the best pure boxer in the strawweight division. Plus, she's 5'5", has great length. Like I said, great footwork, great speed. I think that those are going to be just a lot of trouble for Carla. Carla's going to have to figure out how to close the distance to get the wrestling on Grasso, but Grasso's footwork is going to make that very difficult. Grasso's extremely educated jab is going to make that extremely difficult for Carla to do. So I'm definitely favoring Grasso in this one. Also with Grasso, she's only 26 years old, and we've seen, like in her most recent fight against Carolina, she looked the best she's ever looked, like by far. She's just growing every fight. She's still so young in the sport, young as a human, as only 26 years old. I believe Carla's 31 or 32, and you're just not seeing. Carla's getting better. Her striking is improving, but she's not improving by the same leaps and bounds as Alexa Grasso is. I see this fight playing out like Grasso being able to use her footwork and her hand speed to stay on her bike, stay on the outside, hit Carla consistently with that jab. And, I could see by the third round, like it's going to take a very labor-intensive style for Grasso to be able to move and stick to her jab, use her footwork, use her speed. It's going to be a fairly exhausting style. And since they are at altitude, and this is like 2,000 feet above what Denver is, so this is a really, really high altitude in Mexico City. It's like over 7,000 feet. So I could see maybe by the third round, Grasso getting a little bit fatigued and not being able to be as diligent with her footwork. And maybe at that point, Carla will be able to press her against the fence and maybe get some of her wrestling game implemented. But I just see that being too little too late. Grasso will already be up 2 rounds at that point. So that's my prediction for this fight, is a 29-28 unanimous decision for Alexa Grasso. It's going to be a great fight, though, and, could go either way. I'm excited to watch this one. Now, let's talk about the main event, guys. This is a banger of a main event. Like, just once again, the UFC is on a hot streak right now of phenomenal main events, week in and week out, and this is no different. We have Yair Rodriguez, a young guy as well. I believe he's also just 26 years old. Also of Mexican descent, so he should also have the crowd on his side in this one. And he is just flashy, dynamic. He had the knockout of the year last year against Chan Sung Young, the Korean Zombie. And maybe one of the best knockouts I've ever seen, ever. He got it with 1 second remaining in the 5th round of, main event fight. And that fight was significant for Yair because that was also, that was at Denver. So that was Yair. And Yair also took that fight on short notice. So on short notice, at a high altitude, we saw that Yair has 5 rounds of cardio in him. Like I said, Yair's a really flashy striker, very flamboyant. He throws exciting stuff. He looks to counter. He likes to stand his ground, and when you encroach on him, he likes to throw. He has incredible blazing speed. He likes to throw exciting techniques like spinning elbows, flying knees, high kicks, spinning kicks, all kinds of exciting taekwondo techniques. And Jeremy Stephens is also a striker, but he is a contrasting style to Yair's, where Jeremy Stephens is pressing forward. He's pressure. He's just got big power. He's looking to knock your head off. Jeremy Stephens is tied with Anderson Silva for second most knockdowns in UFC history, behind Cowboy Cerrone, number 1. But Jeremy is just a guy who's going to look to just throw haymakers, and he looks to put massive pressure on guys. So and Jeremy has immense cardio in his own right. He's been up in altitude in Mexico for the last 5 weeks, training at high altitude to make sure that he has the best cardio possible for this fight. And I think that's really going to benefit Jeremy in this one. that and Jeremy's experience over Yair, who's a young guy, hasn't faced too much adversity in his career. Obviously, the Frankie Edgar fight for Yair was big time adversity. But he hasn't faced that much adversity in his career, and he also has a lot of respect for his opponents. Yair does. You can see he's always very friendly, very smiling, very, sort of complimentary towards his opponents. Jeremy Stephens has a mean streak in him, guys. He is a mean fighter. I'm sure he's a nice guy outside of the cage. He seems like a nice guy outside of the cage, but inside the cage, he is mean, nasty. He's trying to really, really hurt you. Like the way that he's got maybe the most vicious and violent ground and pound in the entire sport. The way that he just shattered Josh Emmett's freaking orbital by just ripping elbows down on him after he knocked him down with the punches on the feet. I mean, it's just scary stuff. Jeremy is a scary guy. And he's going to look to put it on Yair. Jeremy's going to press forward, look to land his big shots. Yair is going to have to counterfight him. He's going to have to back up the whole time, which is just exhausting. Moving backwards it's so much more exhausting than moving forward. And when they're at that high altitude for 5 rounds, when Jeremy has been up there for 5 weeks, training at altitude, his cardio is going to be on point. And I think it's going to be a tough pace for Yair. If Yair can't land one of those flashy shots in the first 3 rounds, I think those 4th and 5th rounds are going to be Jeremy's time to shine. If Jeremy doesn't knock him out in the first 3 rounds as well in his own right. And it is worth noting, Yair is also, like I was saying with Grasso, very young. And, he has the ability to grow leaps and bounds from fight to fight. Yair's only fought 2 times in the last 2.5 years. He's only fought 1 time. His last fight was 10 months ago. More than 10 months ago. So he could be a different fighter by now. That's the X factor in this one is Yair a different fighter? If Yair's the same fighter that he was last year against the Korean Zombie, then I favor Jeremy Stephens in this one. I think Stephens is going to be able to land his knockout punch, to be honest with you. I think Stephens is in the right mental space right now. He's taking his career very seriously at this point, and I think he's ready to try to make his run towards a title shot. He's one of the best fighters in UFC history to never have a title shot. I think he's at a veteran place in his career right now where I think he might be able to do that. You saw him have a bit of trouble in his most recent fight against J.E.T, but J.E.T was fading in the 3rd round there. That was Jeremy's round, that 3rd round. I hate to say, it's so annoying. People are like, if that was a 5-round fight, it would have been a different story. Well, if it was a 5-round fight, J.E.T would have paced himself differently and whatnot. It would have been a completely different complexion. But I think that if you're just going to try to engage with Jeremy in a pure striking contest like Yair's going to, and you're going to just try to counter-strike him, I mean, if you can't land that big shot, which Jeremy's only been TKO'd 2 times in his career, 1 time a long time ago by Yves Edwards, and 1 time more recently by Aldo, but that was due to a body shot. Jeremy's just a hard guy to hurt to the head, really hard guy to hurt to the head. I don't know if Yair can do it. I think that Jeremy wins this one, and it's a big learning experience for Yair. I think Yair is a future title contender. I just think that he's running into a Jeremy Stephens right now who is at the top of his game. He's the most confident. He's the most mentally strong. He's the most physically strong. His cardio is on point. He's ready to fight, and I think Jeremy is going to win this one. I wouldn't be surprised if Yair gets it, but I think Jeremy's going to land that KO shot on Yair early on. And like I said, I think Yair learns from this, moves on, and has a bright future and as a future title contender in the sport. All right, guys, so that does it for this episode of Joel Empey Talks Mixed Martial Arts. Please like the video if you did enjoy this episode. Subscribe to my channel. Comment below. I would love to have a back and forth with anybody who wants to comment below. We can talk about the fights. You can talk about if you disagreed with me, whatever you want. Please comment below. Follow me at Empey Talks on Twitter. That'll be in the description box below, so you can click the link down there. And until next time, cheers, friends.